All right, everybody, welcome back. This is part two of our video on terrestrial biomes. I want to start with biome number five today. We already covered the first four in our previous video. This one is called the Woodland Shrubland. If you kind of take a look at this picture here, I think it kind of says a lot about where you might find this particular biome in the United States. If you just kind of look at the landscape in this picture, this is pretty typical of woodland shrubland areas. On the map here, you'll notice that it's kind of this kind of reddish color. You don't see too many of these areas around the world. A few places that you're probably kind of familiar with it at, sort of in the Mediterranean area of southern Europe, places like Italy and Spain, and also here in the United States, in Southern California. That's kind of where you'll find this particular biome. Now, in the U.S., we actually have a special name for it. It's called the chaparral. Chaparral and woodland shrubland is kind of the same thing. We just call it that here in the U.S. But anyway, you'll notice here it's on this graph as well. Remember, we said that Crown Point is temperate seasonal forest. If you go right below it, you'll see this woodland shrubland area. So it kind of exists in a very similar temperature range. The big difference is they don't have the rainfall. It doesn't rain barely at all in the summer months in the woodland shrubland. They do get a lot of rain kind of in the wintertime, but the summertime is extremely dry. And because it's so dry, that actually leads to an increase in forest fires. A lot of times you'll see these areas, if you've seen them on the news, we see a lot of these like raging wildfires out in California, and it's usually happening in the summer months because it's so dry, and these are very difficult to contain. Obviously, they kind of impede on neighborhoods and towns and things like that. So they can be very problematic, and again, it costs millions and millions of dollars to fight these fires every single summer. So I don't know, maybe we should stop moving to these areas, but a lot of people like to live in that climate, so it is what it is, right? Biome six is the temperate grasslands. I just call them grasslands for the most part. They're also known as cold deserts. If you look here in the middle of the United States, think Nebraska, Wyoming, Kansas. Those are kind of the areas where you're going to find these grassland areas. This is kind of an interesting picture, I think, because it kind of tells us why this area is sort of unique. You'll notice, in these states here, right? Kansas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas. Your Dakotas are up in here as well. Um, these are all states that are just east of the Rocky Mountains, right? So you have your Rocky Mountains here, and then you have these states that are right to the east of it. Well, all the rain that or all the moisture that kind of blows in off of the Pacific Ocean, once all that wind blows in and it comes in contact with the Rocky Mountains, a lot of times the rain will fall on the western side, it'll fall over here. And when that air continues down the other side, all the moisture is gone. So this is extremely dry air. We call this a cold desert because, again, it's got colder temperatures than normal deserts do, but they just don't have the precipitation. That's called a rain shadow. We'll talk more about that down the road. But these states, again, are usually very dry and can be fairly cold as well. If you've ever been to Kansas in the wintertime, it's like very, very cold there. So think of the Great Plains. Those are the states that we kind of think about. Dominant plant life here is grasses. Grasses kind of make up the entire landscape. It says at the bottom here, 98% of temperate grassland in the U.S. has been converted to agriculture. So all of these native grasses that have historically just kind of covered the landscape. Those grasses are no longer there. This picture here on the next slide is kind of what you would expect, there to be in the grasslands. But instead of this, we're seeing a lot more of this. We're seeing a lot of grazing animals that are being raised for food, things like cattle, whatever, cows, steers, and they are having a very big impact on those native grasses. Not only that, but they just remove those grasses and replant things like corn and soybeans and whatever. So it's really like agriculture has had a big impact on this particular area. So agriculture, big threat to the Great Plains and to the grasslands. Okay, our next biome is the tropical rainforest. This is kind of a big one. Tropical rainforest on our map here is kind of this, kind of a little bit of a darker green color. But look here in South America, kind of the north. This is the Amazon rainforest, right? A pretty big area. You got part of Africa here, Central Africa, that has a lot. You see a lot of it here in, let's say, the Philippines, those areas. A lot of it is right along the equator. That's where you see a lot of tropical rainforest, mainly because it's so hot in those places, obviously. Tropical rainforest by far is the warmest and gets the most precipitation of any biome. The Philippines, for example, this is a place that is always warm, always wet, never freezes, never snows. Because there's so much moisture, it allows for a tremendous amount of plant growth. So when it comes to biodiversity, it says here, rainforests contain more biodiversity per hectare than any other biome. That means there's more living things in 1 hectare of land in a rainforest than anywhere else in the entire world. So those are pretty diverse places. Threats to the rainforest. One of the biggest things, again, I go back to timber companies, logging, they're tearing down the forests. Some interesting statistics here. The rainforest used to occupy 20% of the Earth's surface, 20%. Now it only occupies about 7%, and that number is going down. 100 acres per minute per day are lost due to things like logging and agriculture, oil export, whatever. These are all anthropogenic things. So the result of that is major, major habitat loss. I know last week I talked about we're losing 10,000 species a year. A lot of that is because because of these rainforests that are being exploited for some of these resources. Biome number 8, two left here. The tropical seasonal forest, otherwise known as the savannah. One of the most notorious places that you're going to find savannah is in southern Africa, right? I mean, this is kind of the classic, place that you're going to find this particular biome. They're usually very large grassland areas with scattered trees. So this picture, for example, is kind of typical, right? You see all the grassland. You see some scattered trees, where animals can kind of take shelter and get some shade because it is, again, fairly warm there. But again, this is, talk about some of the most beautiful animals in the world, most exotic animals in the world. They live in this particular biome. One of the biggest threats is animal poaching. These animals are hunted for a variety of things, obviously. You probably heard all the stories about hunting elephants for their tusks and rhinos for their horns and you know lions and zebras for medicinal purposes or whatever. But those are kind of the big threats to that particular area. Then finally, biome number 9 is our desert. This is the subtropical desert. These are areas where we typically think very, very hot regions. They can get cool at nighttime. But looking here at kind of at these areas in brown, northern Africa, most of Australia. You do have a little bit here in the southern southwestern part of the United States. So again, here we're talking very warm, not a lot of rainfall in this particular biome either. Plant life, in these areas are basically very specific types of plants. Right, we think of cactuses, for example. These are known as euphorbs or succulent plants. These plants have to have some extreme adaptations in order to live in these areas. They have to absorb water quickly and have to be able to store water for a very long time. But again, some of the more common threats to these areas, a lot of human disturbance. People are moving to these areas because it's warm. Retirement communities. They're mismanaging the water there because there isn't a lot of water. They have to get it from somewhere. That's been a huge problem. But again, every one of these biomes has certain human-related threats to it. Those are kind of important to know. All right, folks, that is it for our two videos on terrestrial biomes. Again, hopefully you've watched both of these and then just kind of know a little bit about each individual biome, and you should be good to go. All right, folks, have a good night. Take care. I'll see everybody soon.